44, Trev's Hockey Show. I'm the Trev. You know that. If you're tuning in, if you're watching, it's too sweet. Anyway, some hockey history for you today. And yeah, I know there's a lot of other things I do want to work on, and a lot of things that I will work on, but I figured I'd do some hockey history today. Anyway, telling the story of Sergei Pryakhin. If you're not sure who Sergei Pryakhin is, pay close attention, then you'll learn. But for those of you who do know who he was the first Soviet player allowed to play in the NHL. Let's talk about it. Now, in the beginning, I said allowed, and I meant to say that loosely. There was one Russian player who played in the league before Priakin did. That was Viktor Nikhaev. Played 3 games for the Kings in 1982-83, but by 83-84 he was out of the picture completely. So it's not that Russian players haven't played or anything like that. It's just they had to defect to do it. Come 1988, it's more or less the draft, 1988. The Flames, well, the whole NHL in its entirety, was starting to draft outside the North American bubble. Proof of this is the draft itself, where you have some kid named Teemu Selanne, drafted 10th overall by the original Winnipeg Jets. There you go. But you also saw other Russians in this draft. You saw Valery Kamensky drafted by Quebec in the 7th round. You saw Dmitry Kristich drafted by Washington in the 6th round. And some other kid named Alexander Mogilny drafted in the 5th round by Buffalo. We'll get to him in a bit. He completely changes the story, but if you want a good story on Mogilny, there's a good bio on YouTube. I think it's called Defector. Check it out. Anyway, with the last pick of the 1988 draft, the Calgary Flames selected Sergei Pryakhin, 252nd overall in the 12th round. So at least he, has some rights to a team. He got drafted. That's awesome, right? Right. Nothing bad there. I try and stay away from politics as often as I can. But the political climate in the Soviet Union was changing at that time, and stuff like this was a lot more acceptable to be talked to with the West. So in between May, June, when he was drafted in 1988, to February 1989, negotiations were going on to bring him over into the NHL. And the way this happened was not so much to say, hey, we're allowing Russians to play now. It was more or less just to say, hey, we now have Russians. And the idea behind it was if you just sent one guy who was skilled and disciplined in his background, it wouldn't take away from the star players that they would eventually let go. We'll get to that in a minute. But by March, he was signed by the Calgary Flames for what I hear was not a lot. Most of that money went back to the Soviet Union as part of the transfer agreement. And in his debut in 1988-89, he played 2 games, no points. He played 1 game in the playoffs, but didn't play enough to get on the cup. But he was still presented with a cup ring and allowed to take part in the team picture, so that's cool. At least you got a ring out of the deal, even though you only played 1 game in the playoffs, but who's counting, right? But by the time the Flames were on their way to winning the cup, that Alexander Mogilny kid I was telling you about, he was defecting. He was going from the Soviet Union to Buffalo to go play in the NHL for the 89-90 season, sorry. The winds change here. So after Mogilny defected, essentially, successfully, a lot of the other players were asking for their release to go play in the NHL, and this was their star players now. Because Mogilny gone, Slava Fetisov, who'd been trying to go for years, was finally allowed to go, as was Vladimir Krutov, Igor Larionov, Sergei Makarov, your whole KLM line. is now playing in the NHL for different teams. And we'll probably talk about Makarov at some point, or at least his contribution to the Calder Trophy, as pertains to that. Then you had guys like Fedorov and Pavel Bure coming for the 90-91 season. So the novelty of Priakin being your first and only NHLer at this point is overflowed with guys who were stars in the Soviet Union now playing in the NHL. But for the 89-90 season, he still managed to play 20 games and score 4 points, 2 goals, 2 assists. But he was also playing in the farm system, where he only played 3 games and scored a goal. But he also managed to go play for the Soviets in 1990 and win the Gold World Championships. It's not a bad deal there. I mean, it got him that. For the 90-91 season, ideally Pryakin's last, it saw him play more games than he'd ever played with 24. He scored a goal, managed 6 assists for a career high of 7 points. All told in his NHL career over 3 seasons, he played 46 games, managed 3 goals, 8 assists for 11 points, and 2 penalty minutes. So, not a bad learning experience, I guess, because after the 90-91 season, he went back to Europe. He played in Finland, he played in Switzerland, played in Japan, came back to Russia, and retired in 2000. So, ultimately, being the first doesn't necessarily make you the best or the most sought after. It was more just a novelty at this point that, hey, I was the first. It's good to be the first to something, I guess, but for you Trivial Pursuit buffs, anybody ever asked you who was the first Soviet allowed to play in NHL? This is your answer. Not who was the first Soviet, who's the first one allowed. So that was episode 43, or 44. Trev's Hockey Show. I want to thank you for tuning in. Your viewership always means so much to me. Always has, always will. Don't forget it. I do appreciate every time you guys do tune in. If you like this video, give me that thumbs up. If you want to, there's that little red button. Let's hit that thing. Let's get this channel to 50 subs. Hit that subscribe button. You know you want to. You can find me on Facebook at Trev's Trade Page. You can find the parent channel on Facebook at Trev's TV. You can find me on Instagram at Rockstar Trev TV. Going forward with hockey history, I got a few more ideas up my sleeve. The scope of them, I'm not entirely sure. It might be something small, it might be something huge. I'm not entirely sure. There's a couple different things I want to look at. I probably got more jersey reveals or reactions coming somewhere down the line. Just not sure when. I know there's Stadium Series jerseys coming soon, but I'm sure there's more coming in between then too. But either way, in the meantime, and in between time, you're looking for more videos from the Trev. Later.